In Going Infinite, Michael Lewis, the best-selling author of The Big Short and Moneyball, delivers a front-row seat to one of the most shocking financial stories of our time: the meteoric rise and spectacular fall of Sam Bankman-Fried. Once hailed as the boy genius of crypto, SBF built a multi-billion-dollar empire with FTX and became the poster child of the cryptocurrency revolution. But behind the scenes, cracks were forming, leading to one of the biggest financial implosions in modern history. Through exclusive interviews, unprecedented access, and Lewis's trademark storytelling, Going Infinite reveals the chaos, ambition, moral blind spots, and hubris that drove SBF's empire and ultimately brought it crashing down. In this video from Detailed Book Summaries, we unpack the biggest revelations, dramatic moments, and hard lessons from Lewis's gripping new book. You'll learn how SBF's carefully crafted image as a philanthropic was masked risky bets, shifting loyalties, and questionable ethics, and why this cautionary tale matters for anyone watching the future of finance and tech. If you want more deep-dive book summaries that bring you inside the minds of the world's most controversial and fascinating figures, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Chapter 1. The Anomaly in Cargo Shorts. From the very first page, Michael Lewis does what he does best. He pulls us into a world that feels too bizarre to be real and too important to ignore. Chapter 1 of Going Infinite introduces us not with fanfare, but with curiosity. Who is this guy with messy hair, ratty sneakers, and cargo shorts, sitting in a multi-million-dollar penthouse, juggling the fate of billions of dollars like it's just another video game? This is Sam Bankman-Fried, or SBF as he's known in every headline and Slack channel across the crypto world. Lewis opens with a portrait not of a tycoon, but of a walking contradiction. Sam is absurdly rich but sleeps on beanbags. He's socially awkward but draws in celebrity investors like magnets. He rarely eats meals, doesn't drink, barely sleeps, and yet somehow builds a financial empire out of thin air, seemingly overnight. SBF isn't flashy. He's not polished. And yet, within minutes of Lewis observing him, it becomes clear. He is the weirdest powerful person on earth. This first chapter sets up the question that drives the entire book. How did someone like this take over the financial world? And more importantly, how did it all come crashing down so quickly? But rather than racing to the fall, Lewis lingers in the strangeness of the rise. It's in these moments, quiet observations, odd habits, and genius glimpses, that we begin to realize something critical. Sam isn't just eccentric. He is the product of a new age, one shaped by algorithms, effective altruism, crypto euphoria, and a near-pathological belief in optimization. We meet him not in a boardroom, but in a cluttered room in the Bahamas, where multimillion-dollar decisions are being made next to empty fast food containers. It's a tech bro cliché come to life, except there's nothing casual about the stakes. SBF's company, FTX, is handling billions in customer funds, and every decision he makes, whether it's who to hire or what to tweet, sends shockwaves through markets. Lewis observes Sam the way a biologist might study an exotic species. He notices how Sam's mind operates like code. Conversations don't flow naturally. They are processed, computed. He rarely makes eye contact. He interrupts with logic instead of empathy. And yet, there's a clarity to him, a kind of frightening mental bandwidth that seems able to see moves no one else can. But it isn't just Sam's intellect that makes him powerful. It's the philosophy behind it. We're introduced here to the concept of effective altruism, EA, the movement that Sam claims drives him. EA is about using reason and data to do the most good, measuring impact in numbers, not intentions. In practice, it means Sam doesn't care about flashy donations or visible causes. He wants to earn as much money as possible so he can give it all away. To maximize good. And FTX? That's the money machine. The contradiction, of course, is glaring. FTX is supposed to make him money so he can do good. But it's also becoming an empire, with private jets, political influence, celebrity endorsements, and massive speculative risk. Is it still about doing good? Or has the game become the goal? Chapter 1 also hints at how untouchable Sam seems to those around him. Investors barely do due diligence. Venture capital firms throw hundreds of millions at him based on vibes. Politicians take his calls. Athletes wear his logo. It's not that they all believe in crypto, it's that they believe in him. And that, Lewis suggests, is both the magic and the danger. We also get a taste of what made FTX different. While other crypto exchanges looked chaotic, FTX looked organized. It promised transparency, efficiency, and innovation. Behind the scenes, though, the lines were already blurry between FTX and Alameda Research, Sam's hedge fund. The architecture of the empire was built fast and built loose. But no one was asking the hard questions. Why? Because no one wanted to miss the ride up. The chapter closes not with a climax, but with a kind of warning. Lewis doesn't need to sensationalize. He just lays out the strangeness of the moment. Here's a man with no traditional leadership skills, no financial background, and no filter. Yet he's controlling the flow of money in the most volatile sector in the world. Everyone is watching him, but no one seems to understand him. And that's exactly what made him so powerful. Because Sam Bankman-Fried didn't storm into Wall Street. He hacked the system. He used logic, velocity, and the language of virtue to build something that looked too smart to fail. But as Lewis makes clear in Chapter 1, the smartest people in the riskiest games can fall the hardest. Chapter 2, Raised in Logic. To understand Sam Bankman-Fried, you have to go way back to the quiet cerebral world he grew up in. In Chapter 2, Michael Lewis shifts focus from the chaos of crypto exchanges and Bahamian penthouses to the origin story of a mind built not on emotion, but on reason. Sam was raised in the rarefied academic atmosphere of Stanford University, not just near the campus but right on it. His parents, Barbara Fried and Joseph Bankman, were tenured professors at Stanford Law School, part of the intellectual elite who dealt in philosophy, tax law, and public ethics. Conversations at dinner didn't revolve around small talk or feelings. They centered on logic puzzles, ethical paradoxes, and what it meant to lead a rational life. From the beginning, Sam was different. Lewis paints a portrait of a child who wasn't particularly rebellious, but wasn't emotionally expressive either. He was quiet. He was awkward. He struggled with human nuance but excelled in abstraction. Sam's mind gravitated toward systems, toward frameworks, toward outcomes, and he was surrounded by adults who valued those same things. Emotion wasn't discounted, but it wasn't prioritized. This environment created something unusual. A person who could disconnect empathy from ethics. For Sam, doing good wasn't about feeling, it was about math. If you could calculate which action saved more lives, that action was superior. Even if it felt cold. Even if it meant sacrificing one person to save 10. This brand of utilitarian reasoning wasn't just a family quirk. It would become the central operating system for his life. As Lewis explores Sam's teenage years, he notes the complete absence of the typical markers of ambition. Sam didn't care about grades. He didn't join clubs. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. But he was deeply, obsessively smart. His intelligence didn't scream, it hummed. And when he found a challenge that engaged him, like solving a tricky math problem, he would pour himself into it fully. The outside world faded away. He went on to attend MIT, a place that at first glance should have been a perfect match. A haven for brilliant minds, a campus full of logic lovers. But even there, Sam stood out, not for social charisma or leadership, but for a kind of intensity that made people uneasy. He didn't just want to learn. He wanted to optimize everything, from cafeteria lines to how much time he spent brushing his teeth. If something didn't contribute to a larger goal, he dropped it. But what was the goal? That question finds its early answer in his growing connection to effective altruism, a movement gaining traction among elite university students. A offered Sam something he could believe in. A philosophy that told him the best way to help the world was to make as much money as possible and donate it where it would do the most quantifiable good. It wasn't about charity. It was about impact. And for Sam, that meant earning to give. A phrase coined within EA circles to describe the idea of working in high-paying fields not for personal gain, but to fund global solutions. He didn't want to become rich to live large. He wanted to become rich to matter. To save lives at scale. To buy leverage in a world where problems were enormous and emotional gestures weren't enough. Lewis doesn't romanticize this phase of Sam's life. In fact, he lingers on the moral ambiguity that EA introduced. What happens when you start to believe that outcomes matter more than methods? That anything is justifiable, as long as the final impact is positive enough? These weren't just philosophical questions. They were the seeds of a mindset that would later shape FTX and everything it stood for. Sam's early jobs, like working at the trading firm Jane Street, seemed boring from the outside. But Lewis reveals how these years were crucial. Jane Street wasn't just any firm. It was a hyper-rational, highly competitive world of quantitative traders who thrived on complexity and calm under pressure. Sam fit right in. He learned how markets worked, how inefficiencies could be exploited, how massive value could be created from nothing but information flow. And more importantly, he learned that he was good at it. By the time Sam left Jane Street, he wasn't just another MIT grad. He was a trader who had mastered arbitrage, buying assets for a fraction of a percent cheaper in one place and selling them milliseconds later in another. It was dry. It was obscure. But it was lucrative. And it laid the groundwork for the trading instincts that would later define Alameda Research and FTX. But even here the cracks began to show. Sam wasn't interested in rules unless they served efficiency. He wasn't drawn to team dynamics unless they helped him optimize. And even though his work ethic was unmatched, his people skills were deeply limited. Colleagues respected him, but didn't always trust him. There was something distant, something missing. By the end of Chapter 2, Lewis has done more than just explain how Sam Bankman-Fried got smart. He's revealed Chapter 3, Birth of the Machine. Sam Bankman-Fried didn't set out to build an empire. He set out to seize an inefficiency. That's how Chapter 3 of Going Infinite begins. Not with grand ambition, but with a spreadsheet. A tiny window of arbitrage. A discrepancy between the price of Bitcoin in the US and its price in Japan. A difference of a few $100s per coin. And to Sam, that gap was a signal, not just of profit but of potential. This chapter is the story of Alameda Research, the trading firm that Sam created to exploit that inefficiency. But as Michael Lewis makes clear, Alameda was never just a trading firm. It was the prototype, the testing ground for a philosophy, a system, a worldview. What happens when you take people who believe they're smarter than the market, strip away bureaucracy, and give them access to billions in capital? You get something fast, fragile, and incredibly powerful. You get the early days of Sam's machine. Alameda began in a small, windowless office in Berkeley. Sam brought in a few friends from MIT, a few idealistic, effective altruists, and anyone else willing to sleep on the floor for the chance to change the world and make a fortune while doing it. The office was chaotic, half dorm room, half command center. People worked absurd hours, fueled by Soylent and spreadsheets. There were no clear roles, no titles, just problems to solve. The operation started with Bitcoin arbitrage. In Japan, Bitcoin was trading for up to 10% more than in the US, due to regulatory walls and demand surges. Sam saw it, built an algorithm, and executed what would become known as the kimchi premium strategy. The profits were massive, tens of thousands of dollars per day. But getting the money in and out of different countries, navigating compliance, banking, and volatility, required more than just code. It required nerve. This is where we see the first signs of Sam's risk tolerance, or more accurately, his risk appetite. He was willing to push boundaries, bend rules, test what regulators didn't yet understand. He didn't view the system as sacred. He saw it as a puzzle, and every restriction was just another variable to optimize. If something could be done, and the expected value was high enough, he'd do it. Even if it wasn't exactly above board. Even if it wasn't sustainable. Alameda grew fast. The returns were astronomical. But Lewis shows us something else too. Behind the profits, the firm was unstable. The internal systems were messy. There were massive swings in capital. Sometimes they couldn't explain losses. Sometimes they couldn't trace who made which trades. The people Sam hired were brilliant but inexperienced. There was no HR, no risk officer, no compliance department. It was math and momentum holding everything together. And Sam? He was everywhere. Sleeping on beanbags, coding between meetings, eating barely enough to survive. His intensity was unmatched. But so was his detachment. When trades went wrong, he didn't get emotional. When people got burned out, he didn't slow down. He optimized everything, even his own relationships, with one question in mind. Does this maximize output? This chapter also explores a deeper shift. As Alameda started printing money, Sam began to realize that the real leverage wasn't in trading. It was in infrastructure. Crypto exchanges, the platforms where people buy, sell, and store tokens, were clunky, opaque, and inefficient. Sam believed he could build something better. Something faster. Something that didn't just participate in the market, but owned the rails. And that's when the idea for FTX was born. But before we get there, Lewis shows us the cultural foundation being laid at Alameda. This wasn't a typical firm. It was a playground for EA thinkers, algorithmic minds, and ruthless logic. They weren't trying to build a long-term institution. They were trying to extract value fast. Every decision was based on expected value. Every rule was flexible if the reward was high enough. And in that vacuum of accountability, a particular kind of culture took root. Brilliant, bold, and shockingly unstructured. Chapter 3 ends with a contradiction that pulses beneath the entire story. Alameda was making millions, but it was also fragile. It depended entirely on the continued genius and focus of a handful of people. It had no buffer, no margin for human error. And the moment that genius slipped or that focus wavered, the whole system would be vulnerable. But Sam wasn't thinking about fragility. He was thinking about scale. He was building the next thing. A platform that would change crypto forever. FTX was coming. And as Lewis hints, the machine Sam had built, fast, powerful, and morally ambiguous, was about to get a brand new engine. One that would take him from obscure quant trader to global crypto king. And ultimately to infamy. Chapter 4. The Illusion of Control. If Alameda Research was a race car, dangerously fast and barely held together, then FTX was Sam Bankman-Fried's attempt to build the track itself. Chapter 4 of Going Infinite begins at the moment Sam realized that to truly play the game of crypto, and to win, he needed more than arbitrage strategies and trading edge. He needed leverage, infrastructure, control of the exchange itself. At the time, most crypto exchanges were messy, clunky, or downright sketchy. Binance had scale but little polish. Coinbase had regulation but moved like a legacy institution. Others were plagued by outages, hacks, or opaque practices. Traders, especially institutional ones, were frustrated. They wanted precision, speed, and transparency. Sam saw that gap and rushed to fill it. In just a few months, he and his team built FTX. It was sleek, fast, and for high-volume traders, exactly what they'd been waiting for. But the brilliance wasn't just in the tech. It was in how Sam positioned it. FTX wasn't pitched as a retail trading app. It was sold as the smart traders exchange, built by quants for quants. Sam understood that trust in crypto wasn't based on regulation. It was based on vibe. And he engineered that vibe meticulously. Lewis shows how Sam leveraged his own identity to build FTX's mythos. He played the part of the eccentric genius flawlessly. The oversized t-shirts, the unkempt hair, the beanbag naps. He spoke in abstractions, disarmed reporters with awkward pauses, and consistently emphasized effective altruism as his guiding light. This wasn't just branding. It was a shield, one that deflected skepticism and cloaked ambition in virtue. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the lines between FTX and Alameda remained blurry. Too blurry. Alameda was the market maker for FTX. It helped provide liquidity, smooth out trades, and ensure activity in early days. But Sam controlled both entities. He claimed a firewall existed. But as Lewis begins to hint, that firewall was more a suggestion than a structure. It was a dangerous entanglement, but one that few noticed or cared to question. FTX grew with terrifying speed. The UI was better. The execution faster. Sam allowed tokenized stock trades, leveraged positions, and niche derivatives that other platforms were too cautious to touch. Every product was optimized for velocity. The more risk you took, the more you felt at home on FTX. And the traders came. Billions in volume flowed through the platform within months. Big hedge funds and crypto whales moved over. Celebrities tweeted endorsements. And Sam became a symbol, not just of crypto wealth, but of a new kind of billionaire. One who didn't buy yachts, didn't care about status, and promised to give it all away. His fortune grew fast. But so did his profile. He moved FTX's headquarters to the Bahamas, citing regulatory clarity, though Lewis makes clear the real motive: freedom. In the Bahamas, FTX could operate with fewer restrictions, fewer eyes. The move also allowed Sam and his inner circle to build their own world. They lived together, worked together, and ran a multi-billion-dollar exchange from the top floor of a luxury condo complex. Like a decentralized tech commune, high above reality. But the real story, Lewis reminds us, wasn't just about money. It was about faith. Sam had created something crypto desperately needed. A face, a narrative, a structure. He was invited to Capitol Hill. He rubbed shoulders with regulators. He bought Super Bowl ads, sponsored stadiums, and promised a better kind of finance. And the world bought in not just to FTX but to Sam himself. Chapter 4 closes with a chilling insight. By creating FTX, Sam had moved the casino into his own house. He controlled the chips, the rules, the table, and most importantly, the house advantage. But Lewis also drops the first real note of tension. Sam was not content. Even with billions on paper, he wanted more. He wasn't driven by luxury. He was driven by scale. By the belief that if he could go even bigger, he could direct the flow of capital and influence the way few ever had. FTX then wasn't the destination. It was the engine for something far more ambitious. Total financial leverage in service of a higher mission. Whether that mission was altruism, ego, or something far more slippery, was a question no one asked. Not yet. Chapter 6. The cracks beneath the empire. By now, Sam Bankman-Fried had achieved the kind of visibility most tech founders only dream of. He was crypto's crown prince, the ethical billionaire, the guy who played League of Legends in meetings and still somehow made billion-dollar decisions look effortless. But Chapter 6 of Going Infinite pulls back the curtain. The empire, polished on the outside, was beginning to shake from the inside. Michael Lewis begins this chapter not with an exposé, but with something more subtle, a feeling. Restlessness among employees. Small mistakes that didn't get fixed. Pressure that was no longer exciting, but quietly suffocating. As Sam's public persona grew, so did the disconnect between image and reality. And inside the heart of FTX and Alameda, those who were paying attention could sense that something was off. Alameda, the trading firm that started it all, was bleeding. It had taken massive positions on highly volatile tokens, many of which had tanked in the broader crypto downturn. But because Alameda's capital was largely borrowed, sometimes from investors, often from FTX customer deposits, whether directly or indirectly, those losses weren't just paper losses. They were existential. The deeper issue wasn't just the trades. It was the lack of accounting. The numbers didn't match. The spreadsheets were handmade, confusing, and constantly changing. Only a few people understood them, if that. And Sam? He didn't believe in controls. He didn't want oversight. He believed that smart people left to their own devices would self-correct. But what happens when smart people are overwhelmed, under pressure, and playing with billions? Mistakes multiply. As Lewis shows us, FTX had quietly begun moving customer funds to Alameda when Alameda ran short of liquidity. Sam, in his mind, believed it was a temporary solution. A bridge loan. He told himself the money would come back, that the long-term math would work. But the reality was simpler. He was using other people's money to cover his firm's bad bets. And that's not innovation. That's fraud. Still, the illusion held. On the outside, FTX was sponsoring global events, hiring celebrities, securing institutional partnerships. They had NBA stars on their payroll. Venture capitalists were throwing money at them. Nobody wanted to believe that the most trusted name in crypto was sitting on a house of cards. But inside the company, stress was leaking through. Employees began asking quiet questions. Some noticed transactions they couldn't explain. Others raised concerns about governance, only to be brushed aside. Many were young, unseasoned, and unsure where to turn. FTX had no real compliance department, no formal board. Just Sam and his tight circle, most of whom lived in the same Bahamian penthouse and rarely questioned his decisions. Lewis introduces a few key characters here, early staffers and developers, who began to experience what you might call ethical drift. They weren't in on the fraud, but they knew the math didn't quite add up. Some were uncomfortable. Others rationalized it. After all, wasn't Sam promising to give it all away? Weren't they building something world-changing? But then, the external world began to ask the same questions. In leaked financial documents, crypto skeptics noticed inconsistencies in Alameda's balance sheet. Their holdings were strangely concentrated in illiquid tokens, many created by FTX itself. It looked like a loop, a self-referential system in which Alameda was using magic internet coins to borrow real dollars. And then came the tweet, a simple message from a rival exchange CEO, suggesting that Alameda was insolvent. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even that direct. But in the fragile world of crypto, confidence is everything. And once it cracked, the dominoes began to fall. This chapter ends with the first real sense of fear. Not panic, not collapse, but fear. The kind that lives in stomachs before the crash. Sam's team scrambled to reassure partners, to plug leaks, to deny rumors. But for the first time, the story was no longer fully in their control. FTX had been built on the narrative of intelligence, altruism, and control. But now the cracks were widening. Whispers were growing. And behind the scenes, billions were missing, and no one, not even Sam, seemed to know how much could be brought back. The fall hadn't come yet, but the descent had begun. Chapter 7. The Run. The moment confidence falters, speed takes over. That's how Chapter 7 opens. Not with a decision, not with a crash, but with something faster, quieter, and far more deadly. A run on the bank. Except this wasn't a traditional bank, and this wasn't ordinary fear. This was the crypto world, where billions can vanish in hours, and silence is the loudest alarm. Michael Lewis walks us into the moment the tide turned. It began with a leak. Alameda's balance sheet, reported by CoinDesk, revealed an unhealthy dependency on FTT, the native token of FTX itself. The implication was damning. Alameda's value was propped up not by diverse assets or cash, but by a token Sam essentially printed himself. If FTT dropped, so would Alameda. And if Alameda fell, what would happen to FTX? For years, Sam had danced around the tightrope between the two companies. He swore there was a wall. There wasn't. But until now, no one had been motivated to pull back the curtain. Now they were. Enter Changpeng Zhao CZ, the CEO of Binance, a former ally, an early investor in FTX, but also a rival. When CZ announced that Binance would be liquidating its position in FTT, the signal was unmistakable. A vote of no confidence. A veiled accusation. CZ didn't need to explain further. The market did the rest. In a matter of hours, billions of dollars began pouring out of FTX. Customers rushed to withdraw. The interface slowed. Support tickets piled up. Those inside FTX knew what this meant, and more importantly what it exposed. The money wasn't there. FTX didn't have enough liquidity to meet the surge. Why? Because it had been quietly funneling customer assets to Alameda for years, to fuel bets that were now underwater. The only thing keeping the illusion alive was stillness. As long as customers didn't move en masse, the system held. But the moment they ran, it imploded. Sam scrambled. He reached out to investors. He called regulators. He tweeted reassurances, but they were brittle, scattered, and too late. Internally, a sense of disorientation took over. Employees had no idea how deep the hole was. Some still believed Sam could fix it. Others were seeing the truth for the first time. In the span of 48 hours, the empire that once felt indestructible lost everything. Withdrawals froze. Partners distanced themselves. Investors called emergency meetings. And then the unthinkable happened. Sam reached out to CZ asking for help. Lewis captures this moment with surreal clarity. The once mighty Bankman-Fried, now seeking rescue from the very person whose move had started the collapse. For a brief window, Binance considered acquiring FTX, reviewing the books, weighing the risk. But within a day they walked away. The hole was too big. The structure too unstable. The debts unpayable. By now, journalists were circling. Whistleblowers were reaching out. Regulators were alert. The house wasn't just on fire. It had already burned down, and the public was only just noticing the smoke. Chapter 7 ends with a single brutal truth. FTX had no way out. The trust that built it had evaporated. The money that funded it was gone. And the image that shielded Sam for so long, of quirky genius, of philanthropic billionaire, of benevolent risk-taker, was breaking under the weight of what he had done. And yet, through it all, Sam didn't leave the stage. He kept tweeting, kept talking, kept believing or pretending to believe that this wasn't the end, that a solution was still out there. But the rest of the world had stopped listening. The myth was gone. All that remained was the math. And the math was brutal. Chapter 8. The Fall into the Spotlight. There's a strange moment. Right after the fall but before the dust settles, when everything feels suspended. The illusion is shattered, but the consequences haven't fully landed. That's where Chapter 8 lives. FTX was finished. The money was gone. But Sam Bankman-Fried? He was still talking. As Michael Lewis describes it, Sam didn't disappear into the shadows as most fallen billionaires do. Instead, he walked toward the spotlight wide-eyed and blinking, still wearing his trademark shorts and untamed hair. He wasn't hiding. He was tweeting, giving interviews, jumping on Twitter Spaces, saying sorry, not with remorse but with confusion, like a man who couldn't understand how it had all gone wrong. The rest of the world, though, was beginning to piece it together. FTX filed for bankruptcy. John J. Ray III, the seasoned corporate turnaround expert who had cleaned up Enron, stepped in to manage the wreckage. His first move? To make clear what everyone feared. This was worse than Enron. There were no financial controls, no board oversight, no proper documentation, not even a list of bank accounts. It was a black hole disguised as a company. Ray called it a complete failure of corporate governance at every level. And he wasn't exaggerating. What followed was a flurry of federal investigations, subpoenas, asset freezes, and mounting media frenzy. But Sam didn't seem to grasp the severity. He granted interviews to the New York Times, Good Morning America, and virtually anyone who asked. Not because he had a strategy, but because, according to Lewis, he believed that if he could just explain it well enough, people might forgive him. But each interview made things worse. He stumbled through basic questions. He contradicted himself. He avoided legal advice. He insisted he hadn't knowingly committed fraud, even as evidence suggested he had moved billions in customer funds to cover Alameda's positions. Sam spoke like a man stuck between two realities, one where he was still the clever altruist, and another where he was the architect of one of the biggest financial collapses in history. Meanwhile, the circle around him was collapsing fast. Caroline Ellison, the CEO of Alameda and Sam's on-and-off girlfriend, had lawyered up. So had other top lieutenants. Inside the Bahamian penthouse, where many of them had lived together in what once looked like a crypto commune, trust was disintegrating. People deleted chats, distanced themselves, cooperated with investigators. Some turned. The Department of Justice, SEC, and CFTC began building parallel cases. It wasn't just about bad trades anymore. It was about fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. Prosecutors focused on intent, and Sam's own words, from interviews and leaked messages, began to form the rope that was tightening around him. By December, Sam was arrested in the Bahamas at the request of U.S. authorities. The kid who once dreamed of earning to give had been taken into custody wearing a wrinkled t-shirt, blinking under fluorescent lights. No cameras, no followers, just the start of a long legal reckoning. But Lewis doesn't paint this chapter as a dramatic gotcha moment. Instead, he explores the emotional dissonance. Sam wasn't a villain in his own mind. He didn't believe he stole. He believed he borrowed, and that it all would have worked, if only the timing had been better. If only the markets hadn't crashed. If only he'd had more time. But if only isn't a legal defense. Chapter 8 closes on a sobering note. The myth of moral capitalism had collapsed. The system that let a 28-year-old manage tens of billions with no board, no CFO, and no real accountability, that system had failed too. FTX didn't just go down because of crypto volatility. It went down because it believed its own story. That brilliance replaces caution, that good intentions justify blurred lines, that scale excuses chaos. And Sam? He thought he was the exception to the rule. He wasn't. Chapter 9: Trials, Testimonies, and the Turning Tide. The story had already imploded in public view, but Chapter 9 brings us into the most sobering arena of all. The courtroom, where narrative gives way to evidence, and where myth is weighed against the hard, cold machinery of the law. It's here that the shimmering edges of Sam Bankman-Fried's constructed identity finally met their most formidable opponent, due process. Michael Lewis walks us into the courtroom like a theater. The once lauded crypto genius is no longer holding court in a Bahamian penthouse. Now he sits behind a defense table in Manhattan, wearing a suit that doesn't fit him quite right. The curls are cut. The energy is subdued. He looks smaller, quieter, like someone finally grasping the scale of what's coming. The prosecution, armed with months of evidence, wastes no time. They frame the case simply. Sam Bankman-Fried took billions of dollars in customer funds, lied about it, and used that money to cover risky bets, buy real estate, and build a global image of generosity and brilliance, all under false pretenses. It wasn't incompetence, they argued. It was deception. But what made the case explosive wasn't just the documents or the financial trails. It was the voices of those closest to him. Caroline Ellison, once the CEO of Alameda and romantically entangled with Sam, testified against him. Her voice, shaky at times, laid bare the internal rot. How she'd lied on balance sheets, manipulated spreadsheets, and followed Sam's direction while knowing full well it was wrong. I was afraid, she said. But more than that, I trusted him. Others followed. Key lieutenants who once lived and worked in that bizarre blend of frat house and fintech palace in the Bahamas. One by one, they told the court how Sam had called the shots. How customer deposits were funneled to Alameda. How losses were disguised. How, when it all started to collapse, Sam stayed calm. Not because he had a plan, but because he didn't believe the consequences would ever land on him. Lewis paints the courtroom not as a place of vengeance, but of reckoning. The people testifying weren't villains or victims in simple terms. They were participants in a fantasy where genius justifies everything, where the rules feel optional if your IQ is high enough and your mission noble enough. And now they were facing the cost of that fantasy, under oath. Sam's defense tried to argue that it was all just a series of mistakes, that the accounting was sloppy, the decisions rushed, but the intent was never malicious. But the problem wasn't just what happened. It was the pattern. The late-night Slack messages, the off-the-books transactions, the internal jokes about magic money, and FTX John. The defense faltered under the weight of Sam's own fingerprints. Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, the public mood had shifted. Once hailed as a visionary who might change the world, Sam was now a cautionary tale. Crypto firms distanced themselves. Politicians who had once accepted his donations returned them. Celebrities who had endorsed FTX fell silent. The wave of support that had once carried Sam across the media, finance, and philanthropy worlds was gone. Not with a bang, but a retreat. And yet, Lewis doesn't reduce Sam to a simple villain. This chapter is careful, deliberate. Sam is not evil in the traditional sense, but he's dangerous in a more modern one. A man so convinced of his mental superiority and ethical mission that he believed he could bend reality around his will. And for a while he did. But the courtroom doesn't bend. It narrows. It sharpens. It demands answers. Chapter 9 ends with Sam awaiting his verdict, the full machinery of justice now in motion. Gone are the days of interviews and soft-shoe apologies. This is the final act where a jury, not investors, not journalists, not Twitter, will decide what story is real. And as the gavel echoes through the halls of the courthouse, the question becomes not just what Sam did, but what we all believed while he did it. Chapter 10, The Verdict and the Void. In the end, all the complexity collapsed into a single moment, the reading of a verdict. Chapter 10 is where the long arc of ambition and deception finally reaches its irreversible conclusion. It's not just about whether Sam Bankman-Fried is found guilty or not. It's about what this moment says about the culture that created him. Michael Lewis takes us inside the courtroom on the final day of the trial, and it feels nothing like the chaotic rise of crypto or the slick marketing of FTX. It's quiet, clinical. The jurors file in. The lawyers wait. Sam sits at the defense table, a shadow of the wunderkind who once held the financial world in thrall. His face, once animated by rapid thoughts and relentless interviews, is unreadable now. The jury's decision is swift. Guilty on all major counts. Fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and violations of campaign finance laws. A conviction not only of a man, but of a mindset that had believed itself untouchable. Sam Bankman-Fried, the billionaire who once dreamed of earning to give, had crossed a line, and now the world had drawn one back. But Lewis doesn't end the chapter with the verdict itself. That's just the surface. What he explores next is the aftermath, the gaping hole left behind, not just in dollars, but in trust. Customers who believed their money was safe gone. Institutional investors who once celebrated FTX as the future of finance, burned. Politicians and journalists who treated Sam as a moral lodestar, publicly humiliated. And the crypto world? It didn't just lose a company. It lost a face, a narrative, a sense of invincibility. The regulators stepped in, but far too late. The Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC) and Commodity Futures Trading Commission (CFTC) both launched probes into other crypto firms, but FTX had already shown how deeply flawed the system was. Billions had moved through opaque channels, and barely anyone asked real questions until it was too late. The crash wasn't just a glitch. It was a mirror. And then there's Sam himself. Lewis paints a final portrait of a man who, even after conviction, struggled to grasp what had gone wrong. In jail, awaiting sentencing, Sam still spoke in the language of logic and hypotheticals. He obsessed over how he could have prevented the run. He ran simulations in his head. He wasn't defiant, but he wasn't remorseful either. He seemed detached from the emotional reality of his decisions, as if the collapse were a puzzle he hadn't solved yet. There's a haunting line that Lewis inserts near the end of the chapter. Sam understood math better than people. And that worked, until people stopped being numbers. FTX was never just a company. It was an ecosystem powered by trust, speed, and belief in someone who didn't fully believe in boundaries. And when it all fell apart, the pain wasn't just financial. It was existential for customers, for employees, for the crypto world, and for anyone who had bought into the story of a new kind of billionaire. As Chapter 10 closes, Lewis steps back and asks the question that echoes long after the verdict. What does it mean when someone so young, so brilliant, and so seemingly well-intentioned causes so much damage, not in spite of his ideals but because of them? The answer, Lewis suggests, isn't just about Sam. It's about a culture that confuses IQ with ethics, that rewards speed over scrutiny, and that loves a genius, right up until he breaks something that can't be fixed. And so, as the doors of the courtroom swing closed, the verdict becomes more than just a judgment on a man. It's a reckoning for an entire era of belief that tech would save us, that math would guide us, and that good intentions were always enough. They weren't. Chapter 11. Echoes of the Infinite. By now the courtroom has emptied. The headlines have cooled. The verdict has landed. But in Chapter 11, Michael Lewis leads us beyond the fall of Sam Bankman-Fried into something larger, into the wake of a collapse that still ripples across the world. Because when someone like Sam goes down, it's never just personal. It's philosophical. It asks uncomfortable questions, not only about what went wrong, but why so many smart people didn't see it coming. Or worse, why they did see it coming and still played along. FTX wasn't just a company. It was a narrative. A story of new rules, new riches, and new morality. Sam didn't rise on results alone. He rose on belief. People believed that math could be a moral compass. That effective altruism, this deeply rational philosophy of doing the most good, could coexist with a chaotic, high-risk trading empire. That someone could play both savior and speculator at the same time. And when it all fell apart, it wasn't just because of fraud. It was because the story stopped making sense. Lewis shifts focus here. He moves from Sam the individual to the ecosystem that enabled him. Venture capitalists who raced to invest without due diligence. Journalists who amplified without questioning. Regulators who misunderstood or hesitated. And consumers, millions of them, who just wanted to believe that someone had built a better bank for the future. Sam became a symbol not just of crypto's collapse, but of a broader techno-optimism gone unchecked. For a decade, Silicon Valley had been fueled by the cult of genius. The belief that brilliant young men with unconventional ideas could save the world. And for a while it worked. Until it didn't. FTX's collapse wasn't isolated. It was part of a pattern. Theranos. WeWork. Luna. The details change but the script remains. Vision overrules structure, charisma outpaces caution, and no one asks hard questions until the money vanishes. And yet, in this final chapter, Lewis is careful not to let the reader walk away with easy blame. He suggests something more subtle and more disturbing, that perhaps the real danger isn't fraud in the traditional sense, but delusion wrapped in logic. People like Sam didn't set out to lie. They just became so convinced of their own models, their own missions, their own minds, that they stopped seeing reality as something fixed. Sam's genius wasn't fake. His intentions, at least in his own mind, were sincere. But his flaw was foundational. He believed that because he meant well and understood math, the universe would eventually cooperate. It didn't. The chapter closes with a look ahead. Not toward Sam's fate, but toward ours. Regulators are scrambling to catch up with decentralized finance. Philosophers are re-examining the blind spots of effective altruism. Tech investors, for once, are being forced to admit that due diligence isn't optional. The world is waking up from a dream, one where brilliance was a safety net. Lewis leaves us with a final image. A kid who tried to play God with a spreadsheet, thinking he could outthink consequences. And for a while we let him. We handed him our money, our headlines, our trust, because we wanted to believe someone out there had solved the future. But the truth was simpler. Sam wasn't infinite. He was human. And that might be the hardest story to tell of all.